Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Welcome to another episode of the Raising Them Up Parenting Q&A podcast, where we answer your questions. And we have some great questions lined up for this particular episode, but we would love to hear from you. So we want to ask you to do a few things. First of all, like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you happen to be listening to it. And then secondly, send us your question. You can do that online at the host page for this podcast, which is generations.org/raising them up. Or you can email your question to us at raisingthemup@generations.org. There's also a toll-free number that you can call and leave a voicemail, and we can answer your question that way. It's 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567. All right, Brooke, let's launch into this week's podcast with our first question.
Yeah. So it seems like some of these questions are going to deal with a bit older children. One's going to be for just family life in general. But this first one says, what is a good list of questions to ask a prospective suitor who wants to pursue a relationship with our young adult daughter?
Well, this is something that we're kind of in the middle of right now. At the time of this recording, our daughter is about a week away from her wedding. And this is our oldest daughter, and so it's the first time that we've been through this. And so I want to always make sure that I stay within my lane. I want to be careful that I don't get too far afield. The life launch process is something that we are still experiencing.
Yes.
We have successfully launched 3 young adults into the world at this point, this married daughter being the third. And so we know a little bit about it. But I would say this, and we'll probably come back to this in the future and do more episodes dealing with that whole aspect of the preparing for marriage issue. But I think what I see a lot of Christians do is they tend to camp out on the theological questions. And they oftentimes are very concerned about theological compatibility. And they want to make sure that this young prospective suitor agrees with them on doctrine. And I think there's wisdom in that. I think that's a good category of questions to discuss and talk about. One tool that I would recommend that I think will be helpful for you in going through this is maybe to go through my Foundations in Faith Bible Doctrine curriculum as a family. It is designed for high school students, but it would be great for you to have a copy of this for your family, because one of the things that I do in this course is I talk about the difference between primary doctrines and secondary doctrines. And having a clear distinction in your mind about the difference between those two is very important. So what do we mean by those? First, primary doctrines are those which are the defining issues of Christianity. And they basically tell you who's inside Christianity and outside of Christianity. So things like the divinity of Christ, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the second coming, those are things that are told to us by the apostles in the New Testament as being the primary things, the things of first importance, as Paul puts it. And so the Bible itself gives us a list of things that are the primary doctrines. Authority of Scripture, I think, would be there. The secondary doctrines tend to impact not salvation, but more our ability to worship together in a local church. So there is the church universal, which is all those who belong to Christ. But then there is the church local, and the church local needs to have more agreement, because it just becomes very tedious if you are starting a church together with people and you disagree on the secondary doctrines. And I'll give you some examples of what those would be. So some of those things would include like the continuationist, cessationist debate, like do the sign gifts of the Holy Spirit continue throughout the church age, and are they relevant and applicable to the church today? Or did they cease to exist in the first century as the apostles died? And so these are differences that churches have and denominations have, and that can be fairly substantive. If you're having someone in the church who wants to practice speaking in tongues in the middle of the meeting and others who say, no, we're not going to practice that, it just makes it hard for you to do church together. The issue of baptism. Now, baptism has always been practiced by all true faithful churches throughout all time, and yet there are those who would lean towards what we call Credo Baptist and those who lean toward Pedo Baptist. There are those who believe that only adults who are professing believers can be or youth who are professing believers can be baptized. That's the Credo Baptist position. And the Pedo Baptist position would say that infants or young children can also be baptized because they are in the covenant. These are differences that denominations have. So these are examples of secondary doctrines, and secondary doctrines are very important. So you want to make sure that your child never marries someone who's not a believer. I mean, the scripture is pretty plain about that you have to make sure that they're not unequally yoked or linked together with someone who is not a believer. We see that in the 1 Corinthians. However, there is also the aspects of practical life. So theology is important, and I think those are great questions to ask. And there are some secondary doctrines that I think you can have some compatibility in a marriage, even though you don't necessarily agree on those issues. And it can be hard. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I don't see that a difference on every secondary doctrine has to be a deal buster. So, for example, my wife and I theoretically might disagree on end times or eschatology, and we might have a different viewpoint there. Where it becomes tricky is with our children. How do you teach your children those doctrines when, let's say you take a premillennial view and I take an amillennial or postmillennial viewpoint? How would we sort that out as a married couple trying to teach our children? Those things can be very tricky. But because they're not salvific, there may be things that we can find a path, even though we disagree on a secondary doctrine. The things that people don't tend to talk about, however, or don't tend to focus on are what we sometimes call tertiary issues or third layer issues. And tertiary issues are also important. They're on a different kind of level than secondary doctrines. And I call them tertiary matters or tertiary issues because secondary doctrines tend to impact church practice and church worship, whereas tertiary matters often are related to individual issues of conscience. And they often, in my view, fall under more of a family government sphere than a church government sphere. Secondary doctrines talk about how do we worship together as a church. So that's a church government issue. But the tertiary matters would include some things like family size, which would include issues like birth control, the education of our children. Are we going to put them into a government school, a private school, homeschool them? Are we wanting to have a lot of children? Are we open to the idea of using some form of birth control to limit or restrict family size? Issues of child discipline. How do we discipline our children? Are we going to take a gentle parenting approach, or are we going to be authoritative parents or authoritarian parents? Or, what kind of a model of parenting are we going to embrace? Will we use physical discipline or not use physical discipline? Entertainment issues. What kind of entertainment are we going to engage in? What are our views on things like movies or video games or those kinds of things? Even social media use, issues of obsession with devices and screen time, because honestly, there are a lot of young males now who are very addicted to all kinds of technology. And so these are issues that I find typically don't get discussed, the tertiary matters. And so I think it's important to talk about the primary doctrines. And if you're not aligned on the primary doctrines, you can't marry that person. You just have to say, this is not going to work out. You need to get saved. You need to become a believer. Yes. You need to embrace the gospel if you don't agree on the primary doctrines. But on the secondary doctrines, I think there's reason to be concerned. Maybe not a deal buster, depending on which secondary doctrine it is. But definitely reason to be concerned. But then when you get into the issues of tertiary matters or family government issues, these are the ones that often will really create conflict within a marriage, because these are decisions you have to make every day, even things like food. If you have a mom who secretly wants to raise her children as vegan, and a guy who wants to be a cattle farmer and raise organic beef, you're not going to be compatible. And what I find is that young people oftentimes don't talk about those things because I think they fear they might be deal busters.
Could be.
That they might break up the relationship before it starts. And so their view is, if we don't talk about these things, maybe they won't matter. They will matter.
I think, too, though, they get into so often the emotion of wanting that relationship to work out, kind of like, if they like me, they'll go along with my way of thinking. And honestly, for a lot of young people, they haven't really delved into what do I believe. That's always such a great place to start with our young people in helping them establish biblically what do they believe, so that when that time comes, they're aware that those issues need discussed.
And the Scripture speaks to tertiary matters in terms of general principle. What's difficult is it doesn't tend to give us tremendous specificity on a lot of those issues. Like, it speaks to the issue of modesty, but it doesn't say, how much is too much, or exactly, how many inches does an outfit have to be before it's considered modest. And so these are things that often take biblical wisdom. And I think that the bottom line to a lot of those things is, I would say compatibility on the tertiary matters is pretty important. Unless, in this case, the question was, there's a young man who is interested in our daughter. Unless you are willing to just have your daughter align with whatever his preferences are on the tertiary matters or his viewpoints or convictions. If you're like, we don't really care on any of those things, she doesn't really care on any of those things, I think you're going to probably find that whatever his default position is, that's the direction he's going to try to pull his wife in most cases. It could go both ways. But yeah, you can't assume that they'll just work it out. Oftentimes those things become very contentious in marriage. So a lot more that we could probably say on that issue. But we would encourage you to visit our website, where we have some articles on marriage. And you might find those things to be helpful at familyrenewal.org. We have lots of great resources for the entire family at our website. So we would encourage you to check that out. And I think the bottom line would be, is this young person growing in their relationship with the Lord? Are they moving toward the Lord? Are they submitted and accountable to a local church, a local body of believers? Do they have a good relationship with their family, with their parents? Those are all really good things to look forward to. So our next listener question is from a mom who is asking, what do I do when my family's life has been upended by chronic health issues with a child? So one child is demanding, by necessity, more attention because of ongoing chronic health issues. And so it has disrupted the family's schedule to where this homeschooling family is not getting their work done in the way that they want to. It's been very difficult to get meal prep, to keep the house clean. And so certain duties have fallen on some of the other siblings because this child is not really able to do household chores and things like that. And so there's been a little bit of an unfair distribution of labor in the family unit in terms of everybody trying to make the situation work. And the mom's attention is caught up oftentimes with doctor visits and, having to go out of the home and deal with that. And so the children are spending more time with screens as babysitters, and it's just starting to create a different relational dynamic. And I know that we've been through this kind of a situation with our own family. We had a couple of our daughters that have had chronic Lyme that we've been treating for the last 5 years or so. And so this is an ongoing situation even to this day with our family. So I thought, Brooke, you would probably be good to jump in and give some viewpoint on just what you would recommend and part of what your experience and what you've learned through this might be.
So yeah, our journey was 5 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long now. And we've had 2 daughters with chronic Lyme. One was more dramatic in a short sense in about a year's time, where one was more ongoing. And so if you're listening and you have this situation where you have a chronically ill child, my heart goes out to you. And I just want to let you know, I understand it's really, really a hard season. And sometimes those seasons don't actually go away. And so I just want to encourage you to keep at it, keep pouring your heart into your family and serving them, and then looking for ways to simplify your life. For us, our daughter was 8 years old, and the chronic Lyme kind of hit suddenly. It had probably been there 2 years as we looked back at events with some knee pain. But it came to a head one day when she completely stopped walking. It was like running one day and then not walking another day. And so our world just spun out of control for a little while. And then unfortunately, it was all during 2020. So it was a very unique sort of year for us.
Yeah, most people were struggling with COVID, and that wasn't our 2020 year, but we were dealing with Lyme disease.
It was kind of a over-the-top sort of strange world for all of us at that time. So through that season, we really had to change our way of life because so many doctor visits and a lot of research going into it and talking with those who had been through this journey before us. And then a lot of caregiving went into that time. And so we drastically simplified our lifestyle at that point as far as meals and set up simple routines of tonight we're having sandwiches and tomorrow night we're having cereal and milk. I mean, it was very, very simple at that time. Thankfully, a lot of our crew were at an age where they could carry on with their own studies for that season, and that was super helpful. For the younger ones, we did just a lot of huddling in our living room, which at that time it was winter. And we had a wood stove. And so it was kind of a very convenient, cozy sort of way. We just made life as cozy as possible for that hard season and sought to draw all of our younger children in with us just to do life together in our living room. And that revolved around a lot of, okay, now it's time for this next protocol on our routine of what we need to do. And eventually for us, that whole thing led into a lot of physical therapy. And so one way that we sought to just make sure that we weren't having all our other children be missed and ignored basically in that season was we would bring along 1 or 2 children at a time to help in the process of the physical therapy. And maybe perhaps it was a little way I was watching them as well. We took our baby, we took our toddler sometimes. We take especially the child older or younger along with us. And that was a way that there was some relationship building happening too. And, you know, as hard as it was for us to understand, and as hard as it is, I'm sure if you are in this season to understand, God has purposes that we can't see in the midst of all of this. There's something unique and beautiful He wants to build in your family through that illness and through that hardship. And of course, when we were going through it, I'm not sure I saw that. Yet there were instances where we would catch glimpses of it. For one thing, our daughter was in a wheelchair at this point. She could not walk for 10 months, so was in a wheelchair. And it was interesting to us being on the other side with the child in the wheelchair and having the stares and the comments and maybe the distancing that happened, not with our church family, of course. Our church family was amazing, but with just out in public. And it became an awareness for my daughter in particular and for us. And we talk about it as a family of, you know, we are just feeling like we're normal people. And now all of a sudden people are kind of giving you a strange eye and you go, oh, I hope I don't do that. I hope I'm not the person that's behaving that way. So it brought about questions and conversations with our youngsters that helped them become more alert to those who are going through a hardship, who are going through a hard time. So as we took our other children along with our daughter for the physical therapy sessions, it helped inspire in them a desire to encourage her, but they also saw ways that they could help her. And so when they saw the fun games that were done at the physical therapy sessions, they would take things home and lay out little,
obstacle courses.
Yeah,
and
little
things
obstacle
like that
courses.
to try to help her. And I will say, I'll jump in and say, I think it's really important that you communicate to your children that you are a team. And the way you're going to get through this situation is as a team. They need to know that we're all coming together. Everybody has a part to play. We need everybody's participation and cooperation. And so leadership becomes very important. Just like with a team, the team needs a coach.
Yeah.
And so you as a parent then become that coach. And it's a great time for you to learn some leadership skills. And to start learning how do you create team building and how do you lead. So I think that's really important as well.
And it obviously is a great time to lead the family in prayer because they're able to see one among us is hurting, one among us is in need, and to really engage in that in a meaningful and deeper way than maybe just, oh, Lord, please help us have a good day.
One of the things we did is we bought some T-shirts online that said, in this family, no one fights alone. And, our family would wear that or have T-shirts where it'd say, I wear this T-shirt to stand with my sister, things like that. And it was just great to see that kind of camaraderie where our children realized like we have solidarity here. And so it was very, very sweet and precious in some ways, even though it was very difficult.
And so through that season when it was especially hard and we were more housebound, we did a lot of read alouds just to corral our family. It was a very challenging season, but it also helped then with the little ones were just not off on their own, damaging the house or something. And the older ones weren't getting into mischief. It helped us corral us a little bit. As progress was made and we were able to be more outside and summer came, of course, and we had a wheelchair that made it through rough terrain and everything, we sought to do a little bit more adventurous things like go on nature trails and so forth, just to try to live a little bit of normal family life with a little bit of togetherness there. And it's definitely a challenging season, but God has purposes. And as those years go by for us, we start seeing a little glimpse of, maybe there was something beautiful that grew from that for our family. And I hope that will be the same for you.
Our final question for this podcast from a listener is,
a mom of a 17-year-old wrote and says she has hurt her relationship with her son through favoritism with a younger child. What can she do?
Well, I think there's two different questions here. The first one is addressing the issue of favoritism. And then the second one is, how do you fix a situation like that where there's been some bad patterns that have been established? First of all, the scripture has a lot to say about this issue. I think we see favoritism being played out pretty consistently in the Bible where, there was the example of Isaac giving favoritism to his son Esau and Rebekah giving favoritism to Jacob, and then Jacob giving favoritism to Joseph above his other sons, and other cases throughout the Bible. And so we see how it creates rivalry between the siblings and how it's a very detrimental approach to raising your children. So I think it's probably obvious and, maybe doesn't need said, but here we are saying it, that trying to avoid favoritism is obviously advantageous. I think there are reasons why favoritism can sometimes creep into relationships with our children. And one of them may be what we were just talking about in the second segment of our podcast, where if you have a child who has more struggles, health issues, or special needs, sometimes they just demand more time. And it's not necessarily that you favor them emotionally, but you have to favor them time-wise. You have to show them more attention and spend more time with them, helping them and so forth. And so even if it's not a heart condition on your part as a parent, it can be perceived that way by a child, and resentment can grow, and they can feel like you give all this time to this other child and you don't invest that level of attention in me. So that can be one thing. There's also the aspect that some children are just more difficult than other children. And if you've had more than one, you may have noticed that. Right? There are some children that are complacent, compliant, as they're often called, and others that are strong-willed or domineering. And those ones that push back on everything, and why do I have to do that? And that just constantly create tension or chaos or drama. Those children can really wear you out. Whereas the more complacent, compliant personality who just goes along with the parents' wishes, it's just an easier child to parent. And so you can prefer that type of child because they just aren't giving you more hassle. Not necessarily the person, but you prefer that personality, if that makes sense. Like, I think you can love both of your children equally, but the child that gives you grief every day, you don't enjoy that personality as much as you enjoy the personality of the child who is delightful and likes to help, right? So again, that can either lead to real favoritism or at least perceived favoritism. So the question then is, if you have an older child, a 17-year-old who has picked up on this and has recognized it and is now saying, hey, we're not close, and the reason is because you always defer to this other young person, or you show them more favoritism than you do me. What do you do in a situation? And the advice that I gave to this mom was I suggested to her that she actually write her son, and that she puts down her thoughts and her feelings in a letter of some kind, because she recognizes that even though she didn't realize, I think, that she was doing it, it wasn't her intention, and she certainly never intended to hurt her son, she has hurt him. And he feels a disconnection with her. And so obviously when we have sinned in some way, we need to go to the person that we've sinned against, and we need to confess our sin. We need to try to make restitution if we can. And so I think the easiest way for this to happen, and this particular mom shared a little bit more where, she would try to give her son a hug and he'll kind of pull back, and she'll try to show affection, even like verbally praising him for something, and he'll shrug it off and be like, yeah, whatever, So it's like he's already developed a bit of a hardened heart. And that's on him, really, because even when parents make mistakes, which they inevitably do, all parents do, it's the responsibility of each individual person to handle things in a godly way. And he's been hurt, but that explains his reactions, but it doesn't excuse them. He still has a responsibility to honor his mother, to love his mother, to be respectful to his mother. So he needs to find a way to work through that. And I think some resources for him, one that comes to my mind is a great book by our friend Nancy DeMoss Wolgemuth on choosing forgiveness. That would be a great book that I would recommend getting for him. And we actually sell that at our familyrenewal.org web store. If you go to familyrenewal.org/store, that's a great book for him to work through. But I think the best thing is writing this letter as a mom and telling your son your perspective and how you feel, and confessing your failure if you have inadvertently even engaged in some form of favoritism, to help kind of clear the air. And what I like about it is that it removes the physical awkwardness of having to have a one-on-one, face-to-face conversation, particularly if he's already defensive. He's kind of got his dukes up. Like, this is something he can reread, he can go back to, he can keep. He can read it on his own time. Right. He can process it on his own time. And I would encourage you, if you write this kind of a letter, that you don't expect some kind of a response from your son. You don't put that in the letter of, now you need to come back to me and tell me something. Just, you confess your part, reaffirm your love and appreciation for him, and see if you can move forward and just express in the letter, my hope and my goal is that we can move forward with a positive, appropriate, functional relationship. And so that's my advice to you. Certainly be in prayer about this, and be willing to take a little bit of criticism. Again, I think it's okay for us to insist with our older children or our adult children that they can bring their grievances to us. But we also need to maintain a certain level of expectation of respect and decorum in doing that they still have a responsibility, even as adult children, to respect and honor their parents. And so we do want to hear feedback, and we do want to be willing to own it when we've messed up, and we all do. But Lord willing, you'll be able to find a path forward. And if necessary, have him talk with your church elders or with a biblical counselor. If he's got resentment issues that he needs to work through, then try to get him plugged into some resources that can help him. One resource that we want to point all of our listeners to is our parenting books. So we actually have this book, which is the main book on Christian parenting, that is called Raising Them Up, Parenting for Christians. And that is the book that covers kind of the whole spectrum of parenting from toddler to young adult. And in this book, we talk about how to disciple your child, how to reach your child's heart, keep your child's heart through these years that you have them at home. And then Brooke and I wrote this one together. This is actually our bestseller. It's called Pitching a Fit, Overcoming Angry and Stressed Out Parenting. These books, as well as all the other books that I've written, are available at the generations.org web store. You can go there and simply type in my name, Israel Wayne, and a list will come up. And we would love to have you support our ministry and Generations by purchasing through their web store. We also want to encourage you, if you haven't done so, again, visit our website, which is familyrenewal.org. Lots of free parenting and family resources there. We have an email list that you can sign up for, and we send like one email out a month typically, kind of saying, here's where we are, here's where we're speaking, what we're doing, pray for us, here's a new resource we've developed. So we would encourage you to do that. Also, connect with us on social media, wherever you hang out. Just look up Israel Wayne or Family Renewal. I would love to connect with you there. And until next time, we hope that you will tell friends about our podcast, send them some links, and encourage them to subscribe to the podcast, because we think that the things that we're talking about may be relevant to more than just your family. You may have friends in your church or Christian friends that you think will be helped by this, and so we encourage you to pass on the information as well.
This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.